Hello, this is Mr. Rasmussen with Algebra 1, Lesson 88 on quadratic equations. A quadratic equation is an equation that has an exponent to the power of 2. So as you see this here, it's got a square there, quadratic equation. This one is only to the understood 1, but this one, quadratic equation, because it's got the 2 in there, and this one as well as examples. Now, when you have a quadratic equation with the squared in there and you solve it, it's going to have two answers that make the equation true. That means you're going to have two answers for each one of these problems. And then we go through and they give us some quadratic equations and they ask us to solve it and find out what are the two numbers that when you put it in there makes the equation true. What are the two answers? And we can solve that because of something called the zero factor theorem. If you get two numbers multiplied by each other and the answer is 0, then one of those two numbers has to be 0. 5 times 0 is 0, or both of the numbers can be 0. And we're going to use that in these equations to be able to get our two answers. So let me work through example problem number 1. And we can see how to solve this here. Our first step is to move everything to the left side of the equation and make it equal to 0. So if I do that, I'm going to get x squared. I'm going to subtract my negative 3x from both sides, so I get negative 3x minus 18, and that's going to be equal to 0. Then my next step is to factor this. Back to some factoring there, so I've got an x and an x, and then I get two numbers that when multiplied together give me negative 18. So it's a negative, so I know one has to be a negative, one has to be a positive. When I add them, I got to get negative 3. So it looks like I'm going to have a 6 here and a 3 here. Negative 6 times 3 equals negative 18, and when you add them, I get a negative 3x. Okay, then here's where the zero factor theorem comes in. Since these are the two parentheses are connected by multiplication, then one of these has to be equal to 0 or both. So I actually separate these. I'm going to write x minus 6 equals 0, and then I'm also going to write x plus 3 equals 0 as two equations now. And then I'm going to solve that. So add 6 to both sides. X is equal to 6. Subtract 3 from both sides, x is equal to negative 3. And so here is my two answers. Now they suggest you put them back in just to check to make sure they work. So let's do that. If I put my 6 back in, I'm going to get 6 squared minus 3 times 6 minus 18 equals 0. Actually, let me use my other equation there. Let's use the initial equation. Let's start over on that. Let's go 6 squared here minus 18 equals 3 times 6. Okay, so 6 squared is 36 minus 18, which is 18, and 3 times 6 is also 18, and so that works. Let's try it with negative 3. Negative 3 squared minus 18 equals 3 times negative 3. Alright, so negative 3 squared is negative 3 times negative 3, which is 9, minus 18 is a negative 9 equals, and that is also negative 9. So both those work and they are true. Okay, let's work through example 4. And that is set up here like this. Once again, my first step is to move everything over and make it equal to 0. So 3x squared, I'm going to subtract a 9 from that side. Negative 6x minus 9 equals 0. So I've moved everything over. Then, before I try to factor this, as far as my two binomials, I'm going to factor just simply something out. I can take a 3 out of each term. So I'm going to do that. 3 comes out, that leaves me x squared minus 2x minus 3 equals 0. Now, This here, 3 is connected by the rest of my multiplication. In a certain sense, you look at this and we say that the 3 is equal to 0, and since that is not true, we're actually going to throw that out. And that goes away, and then we're going to simply factor what's left. So do that. I got a negative here once again, so 1 has to be negative, 1 has to be a positive. There's only 2 numbers you can multiply to get to 3, 1 and 3. So I'm going to put the 3 here, because I want the negative 2 to be left over when I add those two together. So, once again, if I split this up, there's a 3 there, it would look as 3 equals 0, x minus 3 equals 0, and x plus 1 equals 0. This one untrue, so we throw that out. This one here, add 3 to both sides, so x equals 3. This one here, subtract 1 from both sides, x equals negative 1. So my 2 answers for this problem are 3 and negative 1. Not too bad. It involves the factoring that we learned not too long ago, and getting your 2 answers. Feel free to plug it back in and check it. I'm deciding not to do that. Okay, go ahead and pause the video, work through the practice problems, and then check your work with mine. I'm going to work through practice problem A right now. We've got x squared equals negative 5x plus 24. Once again, my first step is to, I'm going to move everything over to the left side. So x squared and add 5x to both sides and subtract 24 from both sides, and so there I get that. I'm going to factor it into my 2 binomials. X, this is a negative, so 1 has to be negative, 1 has to be positive. If I look at this here, when I add them together, I got to get a 5. So it looks like if I multiply a 3 times 8, that's going to get me there. I want my leftover part to be positive, so I'm going to stick 8, my larger one, as positive, and my 3 is negative. And so then, once again, I split it, and I get x minus 3 equals 0, and x plus 8 equals 0. And then once again, you can just see that, in a simple equation like that, it's just going to flip. X equals 3 and x equals negative 8. And those are my 2 answers for practice problem A. Okay, practice problem B. Negative 48 plus x squared equals negative 8x. Once again, my first step is to put them all, I move them all over to the left side and then put them in descending order. And so let's move this one over. Let's go x squared plus 8x to both sides, so plus 8x minus 48 equals 0. All right, let's factor that. X and x, once again it's a negative, so 1 has to be negative, 1 has to be positive. I want to be left over with an 8 and I'm done. So it looks like I'm going to have 4 times 12. My 8 is positive, so I'm going to put my 12 as the positive, so it's a larger, and 4 here. And then once again, x here, make them x minus 4 equals 0, solve that. X plus 12 equals 0, so they're simply going to flip x equals 4 and x equals negative 12 as my 2 answers there. Okay, once again, if you have any need any help, please feel free to contact me. Have a great day.